Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm excited about what we're going to talk about today because I think it's something that's on a lot of people's minds who are trying to change. And it's this concern or fear that we aren't changing fast enough, that somehow we're falling behind. So, today we're going to explore this together, this idea that there's a timeline for transformation. And I want to share with you a framework that I'm hoping will offer some perspective on what learning and healing actually look like, and hopefully help you embrace what I like to call a pace of permission in your journey, whether that's your journey in parenting, in your partnership, in your extended family, or even your own inner healing. In several conversations I've had over the past few weeks, I've heard reflections that sound like this. "Ugh, I should be further along by now," or "Why am I still struggling with this?" Other people seem to heal faster than I do. What's wrong with me? If at one time or another you've had similar thoughts, I want you to know, first off, that you are not alone, and you're probably not falling behind. This is something I hear constantly from parents, from clients, from people who are deeply committed to growth and healing, people who are doing the work, people who really care. And yet, so many of them are feeling discouraged, like they're failing at healing, like they're not doing it right, like they've somehow missed some invisible deadline they didn't even know they were supposed to be following. We've absorbed this idea that healing is supposed to just move in a straight line, that once you start, things should get steadily better, that awareness should immediately turn into change, and that if you still get triggered or overwhelmed or reactive, then maybe all of this work isn't really working. But that is not how growth actually works. Healing isn't linear, learning isn't linear, and transformation isn't linear. Today, I want to offer you a different map. It's a way of understanding growth that doesn't shame you for where you are, but helps you see that where you are actually makes a lot of sense. Because when we understand the pattern of growth, we stop blaming ourselves for being human and for the imperfect ways that we perceive and feel and react. If you go way back to episode 9, where we talked about people problems versus process problems, you will find that I love a good crossover between business theory and the psychology of healing. So we're going to really lean into that today. There's a learning model called the 4 stages of competence, or the 4 stages of learning. And while it didn't originate in the healing space, I found it to be one of the most grounding and compassionate ways to understand this process of change, especially when it comes to healing, nervous system work, parenting, and emotional and relational growth. What I love about this framework is that it doesn't frame growth as a ladder that you climb step by step, never looking back. Instead, it helps us see growth as cycles, or better yet, as spirals, right? These circles that are moving in and out. You can move through these stages in one area of your life while being in a completely different stage somewhere else. You might feel very grounded and regulated at work, but completely activated in parenting. You might have done deep healing around your own childhood and still feel lost when it comes to boundaries or rest or self-trust. And none of that means you're doing it wrong. It just means that you are deep in the process of living. So as we walk through these 4 phases, I want you to listen gently, not by asking, where should I be? But instead asking, where am I right now? Without judgment, without urgency, without comparison, but with permission to be where you are as you are. And with that acceptance, you will start to see with more clarity where to place your effort and energy. Phase 1 of this model is called unconscious incompetence. I know that sounds kind of harsh, but it's actually not a bad place to be. This is the phase where we don't know what we don't know. It's our default way of thinking, of acting, and responding to the world around us. This is how we move through life on autopilot. Our reactions, our patterns, our coping strategies, our beliefs about ourselves and others. So much of this is shaped by conditioning, by the families we grew up in, the cultures we were raised in, and environments that taught us what was safe, what was expected, and what was allowed. And here's the important part about this first phase. It often feels comfortable. It feels normal, feels logical. It feels like, this is just how things are. Even if it's not healthy, even if it's not working, even if it's costing us something. Autopilot doesn't feel wrong when you're on it. It feels familiar. In parenting, this might look like reacting the way that you were parented without really questioning it. It might look like believing that behavior equals character or that compliance equals respect, that we're just a yelling family or that you have short views and that's just who you are. Being in this phase does not mean you are broken or unaware or doing something wrong. It means that you are adapted. Now, what does that mean? Adapted means conformed or reconciled. This idea that you were made to fit into an existing order. These patterns formed for a reason, and they made sense once. They once helped you survive or belong or stay safe. We don't leave this phase because we're bad or because it's bad. We leave this phase because something has called us into awareness. And that call can come in so many ways. Sometimes it's internal, a quiet sense that something just feels off. Sometimes it's external, a child who pushes all your buttons, a relationship that stops working, burnout that forces you to slow down. Sometimes it's gentle, other times it's painful. But eventually, autopilot cracks. And that is when we move into phase two. Phase two is called conscious incompetence. Now, this is where we now know that something isn't working, but we don't yet know how to do it differently. This is the beginning of healing. This is awareness. And for most of us, this phase is the hardest because now you can see it. You notice your triggers, you hear your tone, you're recognizing the patterns, and you feel the dissonance between who you are and how you're showing up. And yet, you don't have the skills fully online yet. So things can actually feel worse than they did before. This is the phase where people say things like, I know better, but I still react. Or I can see what's happening, but I just don't feel like I can stop it. Or I feel like I'm failing now even more than I used to. But it's not failure. It's awareness without skill. And it can feel very overwhelming, lonely, and discouraging. You might grieve the way you were parented, or even the way you parented up to this point. You might feel angry that you didn't know or that no one taught you this sooner. You might compare yourself to others who seem more regulated or more healed. This is the phase where people are most likely to quit because it's uncomfortable to see clearly without knowing how to change it yet. But this is also the phase where support matters most. This is where the podcasts, therapy, coaching, courses, books, and community comes in. Not because you're broken, but because humans were never meant to rewire themselves alone. Awareness is progress. Naming the problem is healing, even when it doesn't feel like it yet. As we gather tools and support, awareness alone is no longer the work. Practice becomes the work. This is the point where knowing something isn't working begins to meet the question, okay, so what do I do instead? And it's here that we move to phase three, which is conscious competence. This is where awareness starts turning into skill. Now you know what needs to change, and you have the tools to support that change, but it still takes effort. This is the work of healing. This is waking up each day and choosing consciously, intentionally, to respond differently. You pause before reacting. You check in with your body. You manage your routines. You drink water. You eat regularly. You put your phone down. You remind yourself to slow down. You notice the urge to react. And then you choose something else. This is where nervous system regulation becomes a practice, where parenting becomes intentional, and where self-compassion becomes something you have to remember to do. And this phase can be exhausting because change takes energy. If you've ever thought, oh, why does this feel so hard still? This is probably where you are. And I want to say this very clearly. If it feels effortful, or if you have to try really hard, that does not mean it's not working. It means you're actively rewiring patterns that were built over years, sometimes over generations. This is not passive work. This is embodied work. And over time, something begins to shift. And then, often without even realizing it, we move into phase four. And phase four is unconscious competence. Now, this is integration. This is transformation. This is when things that once took so much effort start to feel natural. Your body responds differently. Your nervous system settles more quickly. Your boundaries feel clearer. Your reactions soften. The thing that used to completely dysregulate you now barely registers. And this is what real transformation looks like. I had a client call me recently to explain a situation that had happened in her life, and she was worried because she wasn't reacting the way that she used to. And she was saying, "Why am I not triggered by this? Why was I so calm? It seems like something's wrong." And as we processed through that, she realized just how far her healing had come. Because in that specific space, she'd made it to phase 4, where her nervous system was able to access calm and she could find and apply tools in real time, and where her capacity had increased so that she had space to hold on to what was happening without all of those old reactions coming through. Now, for her and for you, being in phase 4 doesn't mean perfection. It's not never struggling again. And for sure, it's not being done with the work, but it is having new defaults, having trust in yourself, having increased and expanding capacity. And here's something important: none of us reach unconscious competence in every area of life, and we're not meant to. This is not a straight line from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3, right? It's not A, B, C. It's more like these circles, these spirals, right, that are nested together, and each of them is spinning at its own pace. You might reach unconscious competence in one area and then be called back into awareness in another. Increased capacity also makes room for more growth and deeper learning. And just like looking in a microscope, the deeper we go, the more clearly we see the complexities that we need never have noticed until we started looking. Sometimes these transitions feel exciting, sometimes they feel painful, and sometimes we resist them completely. There are seasons where everything feels manageable, and seasons where it all feels like too much, and we need to put some things down. That's not regression, that's wisdom. Returning to awareness doesn't erase your growth, it builds on it. The process of healing happens in small steps. Awareness, the work of healing and transformation over and over again. Not so we can become perfect parents or perfectly regulated humans, but so we can live with more intention, more compassion, and more trust in ourselves. So if you're listening to this and feeling discouraged or fearful of the work it will take to change, I want you to pause and ask yourself, where am I becoming more aware? Where am I practicing something new? Where has something already become easier? Because you are not behind, you're becoming. And that process unfolds in exactly the timing that it needs to. Now, before you go, I want to invite you to do 2 things. First, ask yourself, where am I in the 4 stages right now? You may find that you are in each moving sphere all at once, but think back to the vision you are orienting towards that we talked about last week. Take an honest inventory. And then once you have an idea about where you are in relation to where you want to be, you can begin to formulate a plan to move forward. And second, if you're in that space of new awareness and conscious choice, where you're looking for support to guide you along this journey, the place I recommend starting is in the Parenting Lab series with Lab 3, Setting Your Intentions as an Empowered Parent. This lab helps you really connect with who you are as a person and as a parent, what your core values are, to identify some of those default patterns that are keeping us in autopilot, and define what kind of parent you're becoming so your growth has direction instead of pressure. This is a gentle but powerful workbook to help you move into awareness and conscious intention. You can find Lab 3 at theparentinglab.org, or I'm going to put that link in the show notes for you as well. As always, I hope you have an amazing week, and I'll see you here next time, where we'll continue to explore the art and science of parenting and put your parenting to the test. Take care, everyone.